I returned home after 10 long years abroad, believing I was walking toward the happiest moment of my life. For a decade, I had lived out of suitcases and steel housing units far out at sea, working as an offshore engineering consultant under harsh winds and endless deadlines. Every shift, every night sleeping in a narrow bunk, had been motivated by one thing: giving my daughter Elise a better future. Before leaving the country, I had purchased a house for her, a quiet place with enough space for a family, a place meant to protect her no matter what storms life threw her way. I often imagined returning to that very doorstep with gifts in my hands and pride swelling in my chest. My name is Michael Rowan, and I had come home to meet my granddaughter Sophie for the very first time in person. Through video calls, I had watched her take her first steps, heard her say her first words, and seen her run in tiny circles around Elise's living room. I told myself that one day she would run into my arms for real. That thought alone carried me through the loneliness of offshore nights, when all I could hear was the ocean gnawing at metal walls. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, I stood in front of the house feeling a strange mixture of nostalgia and nervousness. The walls still carried the same pale color I remembered. The walkway was lined with the same small stones Elise and I had laid together years ago. Even the garden hose was still hanging in its old crooked loop on the fence. I took a deep breath and let myself imagine the moment that would unfold inside. I pictured Elise crying with surprise, Sophie giggling as she ran to meet her grandfather, and the three of us sitting together at the kitchen table sharing the meal I had dreamed about for years. I stepped onto the porch and fit my old key into the lock. The metal turned smoothly, a soft click echoing through the quiet evening. I pushed the door open slowly, wanting to savor the moment. A smile formed on my face as I drew in a breath to call out surprise, but the words froze in my throat. From somewhere deeper inside the house came a harsh male voice. The tone was sharp, intimidating, and filled with impatience. "Move faster. Do you hear me? Move faster, or you know exactly what happens tonight." My heartbeat thudded painfully in my ears. I crept farther inside, the living room dimly lit, as though no one wanted light to reveal the truth hidden within. I followed the voice toward the kitchen doorway. What I saw there hollowed me out from the inside. Elise was on her knees, gathering shards of broken glass with trembling fingers. The pieces sliced her skin, but she did not flinch. She wore a filthy apron stained with gray smudges and ugly words printed boldly across the front. My daughter, who once spoke confidently in every room she entered, looked like someone who had been crushed under years of fear. Behind her stood Brent Lockwood, her husband. His arms were crossed, his face taut with anger. He watched her with cold satisfaction, as if she were a disobedient worker rather than his wife. I felt my entire body stiffen with a rage I had never known. But then Brent turned and saw me standing there. Like a ripple traveling across water, his expression shifted instantly. The anger vanished. A bright smile appeared, unnaturally polite and exaggerated, the smile of a man who knew how to wear masks for outsiders. "Michael, what a surprise. I had no idea you were coming home so soon. Elise was just cleaning up after a little accident. You know how she is always insisting on doing everything herself." Elise shot up quickly, her movements frantic. She tugged the apron off her body and shoved it behind a chair cushion, as though hiding contraband. She tried to form a smile, but her lips quivered, and her eyes were red, swollen, and full of warning. "Dad," she whispered softly, "I did not know you were coming." Before I could respond, a tiny shape appeared beside her leg. A small girl with wide brown eyes peeked at me as if seeing a stranger in her home. "Mommy," she whispered, tugging Elise's sleeve. "Who is that man?" Her question struck me harder than any blow. This was my granddaughter, the child I had waited a lifetime to hold, and she had no idea who I was. I crouched slowly, trying to keep my voice soft and steady. "Hello, sweetheart. I am your Grandpa Michael. I have waited so long to meet you." But Sophie pressed herself against Elise, frightened and confused, and that was when I saw it clearly. As Elise reached down to hold Sophie close, her sleeve slipped. A dark bruise wrapped around her forearm like a cruel bracelet. She pulled the sleeve down quickly and shook her head almost imperceptibly at me. "Not now." Brent placed a hand on my shoulder with false warmth. "Elise has been clumsy lately. Nothing to worry about." But I could see the truth written all over her face. The daughter I left behind full of hope had returned to me hollow and broken. And as I stood in that doorway, one reality settled over me with the force of a falling building. Something terrible had happened to my family during the years I was gone. And whatever the truth was, it was worse than anything I had imagined. For hours after Brent left the house that evening, a heavy silence clung to the walls like damp air. Elise moved through the kitchen with slow, automatic motions, wiping the counters even though they were already clean. Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch, curled into a small ball with her thumb tucked beneath her chin. I sat across from Elise at the dining table, watching her hands tremble with every breath she took. She did not meet my eyes. It was as if she feared that even a glance toward me might cause the world she lived in to collapse. "Elise," I said gently, "you can tell me what is happening. I have been gone a long time, but you are still my daughter. I know when something is wrong." She shook her head quickly. Her lips pressed into a thin line, the same way she used to do when she was a child, trying to hide she had been hurt. "Dad, I am just tired. There is a lot to do around here. Brent likes things a certain way. A certain way." The phrase settled heavily in my chest. I reached out and took her hand. Her fingers tensed as though expecting pain. When she finally looked at me, her eyes were empty in a way I did not recognize. "Elise, tell me about the bruises." Her face crumpled instantly. She pulled her hand away and covered her mouth as if trying to hold in the truth that begged to escape. Tears slipped down her cheeks one by one, silent at first and then suddenly uncontrollable. She hunched forward in her chair, her shoulders shaking violently. "Dad," she whispered through uneven breaths, "I did not want you to see me like this." I moved to her side and held her gently, afraid she might shatter like the glass she had been forced to clean. After several minutes, she finally managed to speak. "When Sophie was born, I was not myself anymore. Something inside me broke. I could not sleep. I could not eat. I felt terrified every minute of the day. I thought I was going crazy. The doctor said it was postpartum depression, but it felt like I was sinking into a hole that had no bottom." She paused to wipe her eyes, her hands trembling. "They put me on medication, strong medication. I was barely able to think. I would stare at the wall for hours without realizing time was passing. Some days I could not hold Sophie because my arms felt too weak. I listened, my heart cracking with every sentence. I remembered Elise before I left, vibrant and determined. Now she sat beside me like a wounded bird, trying to hide broken wings. Brent and his parents said they would help me, she continued, her voice becoming small and brittle. They visited often. They brought food. They said they wanted to take care of the paperwork because I was too overwhelmed. I trusted them. I did not understand anything I was signing. They told me it was medical authorizations, insurance forms, consent papers. I could not focus. I just signed. Her voice broke entirely. The day I woke up and the fog finally lifted a little, I realized the house was no longer mine. They said I had given it to them. They said I had signed a debt agreement. They said I owed them for caring for me. And if I tried to fight it, they would take Sophie away and prove I was mentally unfit. A cold shiver ran through me. The betrayal was so calculated, it almost seemed impossible. Elise stood and walked to a lower cabinet. She reached behind a box of old cookbooks and pulled out a thick folder. She placed it on the table and slid it toward me. "Everything is in there," she whispered. "Every paper they made me sign. Every medical record." I kept them hidden. I kept hoping someone would help me make sense of it all. I opened the folder. Inside were multiple property transfer contracts, stamped and notarized, all carrying Elise's hesitant, wobbly signatures. There were power of attorney forms, bank authorizations, and even a document stating she agreed to provide domestic services in exchange for room and board. On another page, I saw dates listed in red. They matched the same time frame Elise had told me she could barely understand her own name. I felt the kitchen spin around me, my breath turning shallow. Elise had been exploited in the darkest moment of her life. "That is not all," she whispered and lifted the sleeve of her shirt. More bruises covered her arms. Some were fading, some were new. "He gets angry at everything. If I am slow, if I forget something, if Sophie cries. He says it is my fault for being weak." I took her hands firmly. "Elise, listen to me. You did not fail. You were sick and they took advantage of you. What they did is wrong. It is criminal. And I swear to you, I will make this right." She broke again, leaning into my chest like she used to when she was little and afraid of thunderstorms. "Dad, I have lived in fear for 3 years. I thought you would be disappointed in me. I thought you would think I ruined everything." "You could never disappoint me," I said. "They stole your voice. But I am here now, and I will fight until you get it back." As I held her close, one truth settled into me with burning clarity. The years I spent working overseas gave the Lockwood family the perfect chance to imprison my daughter in her own life. But those years were over, and whoever had done this to her had just made an enemy who would not rest until justice was served. The next morning I woke before dawn, unable to push Elise's words from my mind. Every detail she revealed replayed itself in harsh flashes: her trembling hands, her terrified eyes, the mechanical way she moved around her own home. I could not sit still. Something inside me demanded action, demanded answers, demanded justice. By 6:30, I was already on the road, driving toward the medical clinic where she had received treatment during the worst months of her illness. I needed to know exactly what state she had been in when Brent and his family placed those documents in front of her. The clinic sat on a quiet street with a modest facade that disguised the gravity of the lives that passed through its doors. I stepped into the lobby and approached the reception desk. The woman behind the counter recognized Elise's name immediately, and her expression softened with genuine concern. After a few phone calls, she directed me to a private office where Dr. Helena Morris, Elise's former psychiatrist, was waiting. Dr. Morris stood as I entered. She was in her mid-40s with calm eyes and a compassionate presence that felt disarming after the turmoil of the past night. She gestured for me to sit. "Mr. Rowan, I remember your daughter very well." "How is Elise now, trying to hold herself together?" I answered. "But that is why I am here. Something terrible has been done to her, and I need the truth." Dr. Morris folded her hands on the desk. "Tell me what you know." I explained everything. The forced signatures, the stolen house, the threats, the years of manipulation. As I spoke, the doctor's face tightened with controlled anger. When I finished, she let out a slow exhale and opened a thick file drawer. She pulled out an old binder and placed it gently on the desk between us. This is Elise's medical record during the time she was under my care. I think you need to understand just how impaired she was. She flipped through pages filled with notes, medication charts, and daily evaluations. Her finger stopped on a section marked with yellow tips. These dates are important. They indicate the period when Elise experienced her most severe depressive and anxiety episodes. During these weeks, we prescribed her a high dosage of psychiatric medication to stabilize her condition. I read the dates. They matched exactly the dates on the property transfer documents Elise had shown me. Dr. Morris continued carefully. Mr. Rowan, during this period, Elise was not capable of making sound decisions. She was disoriented, highly suggestible, and mentally overwhelmed. Some days she could not differentiate between dreams and reality. She could not have understood the legal significance of anything placed in front of her. My hands curled into fists on my lap. I felt heat rise in my chest, a boiling rage I barely managed to contain. How could anyone exploit a woman in this state? The door opened quietly, and a nurse stepped inside. "This is Nurse Karen Riley," Dr. Morris said. "She worked directly with Elise. I asked her to join us because she witnessed Elise's condition firsthand." Karen nodded politely before sitting. "I remember Elise very clearly. She was one of our most vulnerable patients at the time. I remember a day when she tried to sign a greeting card from her church group. Her hand was shaking so badly that she could not hold the pen straight. I actually had to guide her hand so the message would not be illegible." Karen looked at me with sympathy. There is absolutely no way she could understand or consent to legal agreements. Dr. Morris retrieved another document from the binder. This is a formal summary of Elise's condition during that time. It outlines that she lacked the cognitive and emotional capacity to consent to anything. It is admissible in court. She handed the summary to me, and I felt its weight settle into my hands like a weapon forged for battle. Every word in it confirmed what I already suspected. Elise had been legally and medically incapable of signing anything. "But there is something else you should know," Dr. Morris said. "In reviewing her file before you arrived, I noticed something unusual. During Elise's treatment, Brent's father came here often. He asked about her schedule, her dosages, and how sedated she was after each medication adjustment. At the time, I assumed he was concerned about her well-being. But now, in light of what you told me, it raises disturbing questions." My breath caught in my throat. "Are you saying he may have been timing the signatures to her highest sedation levels?" Dr. Morris did not answer immediately. After a long pause, she said, "I cannot say for certain, but it is possible. And if it is true, then this was not just exploitation. It was premeditated." A chill ran through me. The thought that Elise was targeted deliberately made my stomach twist. I closed the summary folder slowly, my jaw tensing until it ached. "Thank you," I said, my voice low and steady. "You may have just given me the proof that will save my daughter's life." As I left the clinic and walked toward my car, a strange feeling prickled at the back of my neck. I glanced over my shoulder. Parked across the street was a dark SUV with tinted windows. The engine idled softly. I could not see the driver, but I felt their eyes on me. When I stepped closer, the SUV sped away without hesitation. And in that moment, I knew the Lockwoods were already aware of what I was doing. The fight to save Elise had only just begun. Leaving the clinic that morning was like stepping from one world into another. Inside, I had been surrounded by truth, compassion, and professionals who genuinely cared about Elise's well-being. Outside, I stepped back into a world shaped by deception, control, and danger. The image of the dark SUV lingered in my mind as I drove across town, gripping the medical summary as tightly as a lifeline. Brent's family was watching. They knew something was shifting. But for the first time in years, Elise had someone fighting for her, and I intended to fight with everything I had. I found the law office I had researched the night before, tucked quietly between two tall buildings. The sign on the door read, Cassandra Pike, attorney at law. I had read enough about her to know she took the cases that scared other lawyers. Exploitation, coercion, hidden abuse. If anyone could bring justice to Elise, it was her. Inside, the office was modern and orderly. Cassandra herself stepped out of a conference room to greet me. She was in her late 40s, with sharp, perceptive eyes that carried no hesitation. She shook my hand firmly and led me to her office. Her presence alone steadied something inside me. "Tell me everything," she said as she sat. "Do not leave out a single detail." I laid out the entire story from beginning to end. Brent's cruelty, Elise's bruises, the forced labor, the suspicious timing of the signatures during her medicated haze, the tracking device I had found under my car, and the dark SUV watching me outside the clinic. Cassandra took notes rapidly, asking precise questions. Dates, places, names. She examined the documents Elise had hidden away, turning each page with a growing sense of outrage. Then I handed her the medical summary from Dr. Morris. She read it slowly and carefully. When she finished, she leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms, her expression resolute. "This is not just a case of exploitation," she said firmly. "This is a systematic abuse of a vulnerable adult. They manipulated a mentally impaired woman, stole her assets, isolated her, and coerced her into unpaid servitude. And if the father timed her signatures to her medication spikes, that crosses into premeditation." My heart pounded. What does that mean legally? It means she never gave valid consent. It means every document they made her sign is void. And it means the Lockwoods are in far more trouble than they realize. She stood up and began pacing slowly, thinking out loud as she formed a plan. First, we issue a formal demand letter. We give them 48 hours to return the property to Elise and compensate her for damages. If they comply, this stays civil. And if they do not, I asked. Cassandra stopped pacing and met my eyes. Then we unleash everything. A civil suit for fraud and coercion. A criminal complaint for exploitation of a vulnerable adult. And depending on how deep this goes, possibly charges related to human trafficking statutes. I felt the room tilt slightly. Human trafficking. Under the law, forcing someone to work under threats, coercion, or manipulation, especially when leveraging mental instability, can legally qualify. People often think trafficking only means smuggling. It does not. It includes what has been happening to Elise. I swallowed hard. What else? Cassandra tapped her pen thoughtfully. I also want the public on our side. I know a journalist who specializes in uncovering hidden abuses in powerful families. Once we file the complaint, the story will spread fast. The Lockwoods rely heavily on reputation. Losing that may pressure them into compliance. If not, it will certainly make the authorities take the case seriously. I nodded slowly, and the SUV watching me. That tells me they feel threatened, she replied. It also tells me they are careless. After today, they will know you have legal representation. They will know you are not backing down, and that will make them panic. She scribbled a final note, then closed her notebook with decisive confidence. We go to them today. They need to see we are not afraid. An hour later, I found myself driving behind Cassandra toward the Lockwood estate. The main house towered over manicured gardens and a grand circular driveway. It was imposing, designed to intimidate. But I felt no fear. Cassandra walked ahead of me, heels striking the marble floor of the entryway with the sound of a woman unaccustomed to losing. We were led to a wide study where Brent's parents waited. His father, Mark Lockwood, was a tall man with a polished appearance and a smile that never reached his eyes. His mother, Irene, held a posture so rigid it seemed carved from stone. "Mr. Rowan," Mark said in a dismissive voice, "I hear you have concerns. Elise is doing quite well here. She should be grateful." Cassandra stepped forward and placed the demand letter on his desk. "Actually," she said calmly, "your family has 48 hours to return the property and compensate Elise. Otherwise, we file charges." Mark skimmed the letter and snorted. "You must be joking. We have connections that go back generations. We are untouchable." Cassandra smiled without warmth. "No one is untouchable when there is evidence." At that moment, Brent entered the room. His smile vanished the instant he saw me. His face twisted with hatred. "You think you can take her from us," he hissed. "She belongs here." My pulse thundered in my ears. "Elise belongs to no one," I said. Brent stepped closer as if ready to strike. Cassandra raised her phone. "Every word you have said is recorded. Continue." He froze. We left the estate without looking back. Outside, Cassandra turned to me with a grim but satisfied expression. "They are scared, and scared people make mistakes." Good. That means we are closer to winning. As we drove away, I checked my rearview mirror. The black SUV was back, following at a distance, and I knew the war had officially begun. The 48-hour deadline passed without a single response from the Lockwood family. No phone call, no email, not even a threat, which in their world of arrogance meant one thing. They believed they were invincible. But Cassandra had warned me on the first day that powerful people rarely surrender quietly. They wait, assuming their name alone will silence anyone who dares challenge them. What they failed to understand was that the silence only strengthened our resolve. Early the next morning, Cassandra called me with a voice brimming with purpose. "It is time. I have filed the civil petition, the criminal complaint, and the injunction request. I sent everything to the authorities, and the press already has the story. Brace yourself." Barely an hour later, the story appeared on a major news outlet. The headline was simple, but the impact was explosive. "Vulnerable mother forced into servitude after postpartum crisis. Family accused of coercion, fraud, and abuse." Elise's identity was protected, but the Lockwood name was everywhere. The article quoted Dr. Morris's medical summary, cited the suspicious timing of the signatures, referenced the tracking device found under my car, and described years of hidden cruelty. By afternoon, the story had spread through social media. People were outraged. They shared personal stories of manipulation, abuse, and families hiding behind reputations to crush those weaker than them. I watched Elise read the article from our kitchen table. Her hands covered her mouth and tears slid down her cheeks. "Dad," she whispered, "I never thought anyone would believe me." "They do believe you," I said softly, "and they are on your side." Neighbors came by offering help. Strangers sent messages of support. Someone left a bag of groceries on the porch with a note saying, "Te stromomung," you are not alone. I had seen Elise survive years of isolation, making no sound because fear had been her cage. But for the first time in a long time, I saw her lift her head with a quiet sense of hope. The legal momentum moved quickly. Cassandra called again mid-afternoon. Emergency hearing at 2. We need to be there. They will try to fight it, so be prepared. We arrived at the courthouse early. Cassandra walked with fierce confidence, her heels echoing sharply through the corridors. Elise walked beside me holding my arm, her breath shallow, her eyes darting nervously. Sophie stayed with a trusted neighbor who had volunteered to watch her. Inside the courtroom, Brent and his parents sat on the opposite side, flanked by 3 attorneys in dark suits. Brent's face was tight with barely contained anger. Mark Lockwood sat stiffly, his jaw locked in indignation. Irene stared straight ahead with cold, glassy eyes, as though she were above being judged. Judge Callahan entered, and every sound in the room fell silent. She reviewed the medical records, the documented timeline, the forced labor allegations, and Cassandra's petition. Then she lifted the medical summary. According to this report, she said, your daughter was heavily medicated and cognitively incapacitated when she signed the property documents. This alone invalidates the transfer. However, the pattern of coercion and evidence of isolation raises deeper concerns. One of the Lockwood lawyers stood quickly. Your Honor, our family assisted Ms. Rowan during a difficult period. She signed willingly. Judge Callahan looked at him sharply. Signed willingly while barely able to write her own name. She tapped the page. This document states she could not even recognize familiar faces. That is not consent. Brent shot to his feet. She is lying. He pointed at Elise with a trembling finger. She is manipulating everyone. She belongs with us. A bailiff stepped forward instantly. Sit down. Brent hesitated, then slowly lowered himself back into his seat, his face red with fury. Judge Callahan continued. I am granting an immediate injunction nullifying the property transfer. The house will return to Ms. Elise Rowan effective today. Additionally, I am issuing a temporary restraining order against the Lockwood family. They are prohibited from approaching or contacting Miss Rowan or her daughter. Elise gasped softly. I felt her hand squeeze mine in disbelief. Brent lunged forward again. You cannot do this. You cannot take her from me. His lawyer grabbed his sleeve, whispering urgently. The judge signaled the bailiff, who moved closer, ready to intervene. Court is adjourned, Judge Callahan said firmly. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest. As the room cleared, Mark Lockwood glared at me with thinly veiled hatred. This is not over. For once, I felt no fear. You are right, I told him quietly. It is not. But this time, Elise is not the one who should be afraid. Outside the courthouse, 2 police officers escorted us to the car and followed us back to Elise's house. One of them walked us to the door and said, You are safe now. Call if anything feels wrong. We are watching the neighborhood closely. When we stepped inside, Elise broke down completely. She collapsed into my arms, shaking with a mix of relief and disbelief. Dad, I cannot believe this. I cannot believe the house is mine again. I helped her to the couch and held her until her breathing steadied. Sophie ran to her mother moments later, sensing something had changed. Mommy, are we staying here forever? Elise looked at me, her eyes full of emotion. Yes, sweetheart, we are. Later that evening, when I stepped outside to take out the trash, something glinted beneath my car. I crouched down slowly. Another small black device was attached to the frame. Another tracker. The Lockwoods were still watching, still lurking, which meant the next move would be theirs, and it would not be peaceful. The next several days unfolded like sunlight slowly pushing back a long night. Elise began to move differently around the house. Her shoulders lifted a little higher, her steps carried a hint of freedom, and sometimes I caught her humming softly while preparing breakfast for Sophie. The bruises on her arms began to fade, though the fear behind her eyes had not disappeared completely. Trauma does not evaporate just because a judge signs a paper. It lingers, waiting for shadows to move in familiar ways. Still, there were small victories. Sophie began calling me Grandpa with natural warmth instead of shy hesitation. She would climb into my lap with her storybooks and chatter about school, about her stuffed animals, about anything that brought color into her little world. I treasured every syllable. One afternoon, Elise and I repainted Sophie's bedroom. The sound of her laughter mixing paint, smudging streaks of yellow across the walls, reminded me of the girl she used to be. Dad, I cannot remember the last time I felt a moment like this, she admitted. I forgot how it feels to breathe without worrying who is listening. I squeezed her hand. You will have many more of these moments. This house belongs to you. This piece belongs to you. We repaired the loose cabinet hinges together, tightened the balcony rails, and fixed a squeaky hallway door. Each task felt like reclaiming a piece of her life. But beneath the warmth of these days, something darker pulsed steadily. It was the sense of being watched. The first sign came 3 nights after the hearing. I stepped outside to lock the back gate and noticed faint footprints in the damp soil beneath Sophie's window. Not ours, not fresh, but recent enough to raise every instinct inside me. Elise went pale when I told her. Do you think it was him? She whispered. I hoped not. I also knew hope had nothing to do with reality. The next sign came the following morning. As I walked Sophie to the car for school, she pointed toward the street. Grandpa, why is that car there again? I followed her gaze. A silver sedan I did not recognize was parked 2 houses down. The driver sat with a cap pulled low over his face. When I looked directly at him, he adjusted his mirror and turned away. I ushered Sophie inside quickly. Inside the house, I checked every lock twice. The memory of the tracking device weighing in my pocket made my stomach twist. Later that afternoon, I called Cassandra and told her about the footprints and the sedan. She did not sound surprised. They are rattled, she said. They feel something slipping out of their control. When people like the Lockwoods panic, they become unpredictable. Do not let Elise or Sophie out alone. I will notify the police to add patrols in your area. Her calm voice steadied me, but it did not erase the unease coiling in my chest. That evening, while Elise read Sophie a bedtime story, I sat on the porch watching the dim streetlights flicker. A breeze rustled the leaves along the sidewalk. The silver sedan was gone, but the silence felt unnaturally heavy. I had spent years offshore in harsh storms, where danger was loud and immediate. This was different. This danger waited patiently in the dark. At midnight, I checked the locks again. All secure. I stepped into Elisa's room to make sure she was asleep. She lay curled beside Sophie, both breathing softly. I felt a deep surge of love and protectiveness overwhelm me. I returned to the living room, intending to sit for a moment before heading back to bed. Something on the coffee table caught my eye. A small, folded piece of paper. Elise must have left a note, I thought. But when I picked it up, my stomach dropped. There was no handwriting, only a printed message. You cannot hide her forever. A cold wave of dread washed over me. I checked the door again. The locks were untouched, the windows secured. But someone had been inside. Recently. Someone had walked into the house while we slept, or while we were distracted. I paced the room in a tightening circle, gripping the note hard enough that the paper bent beneath my fingers. My breath came fast and shallow. How did they get in? Who left it when? And what did they mean by her? Was it Elise they wanted, or was it Sophie? I forced myself to sit down and think through every possibility. The note meant someone had access. They might have a spare key, or they might know how to bypass the locks. Or worse, someone Elise once trusted might still have an entryway into her life. I turned every light in the house on, checking every corner, every closet, every crawl space. Nothing. But the idea of an intruder lingered like a ghost behind me. When Elise came out of her room drowsy and confused, she saw the note in my hand and froze. "Dad," her voice trembled. "That is his handwriting style. Brent used to print messages like that when he wanted to scare me. He said handwritten notes were too human, and this made him feel more in control." Her entire body shivered. I pulled her close. "I promise you, Elise, he will never hurt you again. But we must stay alert. Whatever this is, it is not over." She nodded slowly, tears gathering in her eyes. "What do? We fight back before he acts, and we do not give him the chance to catch us unprepared." But deep inside, I felt it. The storm was moving closer, much closer than I had feared. 2 nights after we found the note, a violent storm rolled over the neighborhood. The sky churned with thick clouds and thunder cracked so sharply it sounded like the heavens were splitting apart. Winds howled down the street, bending tree branches and rattling shutters. I kept walking from window to window, checking every lock for the 10th time. Elise did not argue. She felt it too. That quiet, crawling sense that something was coming, something inevitable. Near midnight, lightning flashed again, illuminating the yard in a blinding white glare. Rain hammered the roof. Inside, the house felt too still, as if the storm was holding its breath around us. I was returning from the kitchen with a glass of water when I caught it. A sound that did not belong to the storm. A soft scraping noise on the front porch. Slow, deliberate, like someone dragging something heavy across wood. I froze, listening. The scraping returned, louder this time. My body went rigid. I stepped to the nearest window and lifted the curtain an inch. In the brief flash of lightning, I saw a figure moving across the yard. Tall, hooded, carrying a container in one hand. A sickening dread gripped my chest. Not again. Not now. The rain shifted, and another lightning bolt burst across the sky. This time I saw him clearly. Brent. His eyes wild, his movements erratic. And in his hand was no container. It was a gas can. He was splashing liquid along the side of the house. My blood ran ice cold. I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers and dialed emergency services. "A man with gasoline is attempting to set my house on fire. We are inside. Send units now." "Sir, get your family out of the house immediately," the operator urged. I ran down the hallway and burst into Elise's room. "Elise, get up. Get Sophie. We have to leave now. There is no time." Her eyes snapped open, fear instantly replacing exhaustion. She jumped out of bed and shook Sophie gently awake. "Baby, we have to go. Right now." As they hurried into the hallway, a muffled thump came from the front porch. Then another. Flames flickered outside the living room window, casting orange streaks across the dark walls. Smoke began to seep inside, curling upward like sinister fingers. "Mommy, what is happening?" Sophie cried. "It is just a storm, sweetie," Elise whispered, trying to keep her voice calm even as panic trembled beneath every word. "We are going outside with Grandpa." But the front door was already blocked by the spreading fire. Heat radiated through the walls like the breath of a monster waking from sleep. "The back door," Elise gasped. "Yes, go," I shouted. "Through the dining room. Move!" We sprinted toward the back of the house, but before we reached it, a deafening crash rattled the walls. Glass shattered. A dark silhouette stepped through the broken sliding door. His outline warped behind the dancing light of the fire. Brent. His hair was plastered to his forehead by the rain, his clothes soaked, his eyes wide with a feverish fury I had never seen even in his worst moments. He clutched a metal tool in his hand, gripping it so tightly his knuckles looked bone white. He stepped forward, the tool scraping along the tile. "You think you can take everything from me," he bellowed. "You think you can steal my family. You cannot hide her from me. You cannot hide my daughter." Elise pushed Sophie behind her, shaking violently. Sophie sobbed, clinging to her mother's leg. I stepped between them. "Brent, enough! It ends tonight. Leave them alone!" he roared, spit flying from his mouth. "You do not tell me what to do. She is mine. She will always be mine." He lunged at me with the metal tool raised. Instinct took over. I dodged, grabbing his arm and slamming my shoulder into his chest. He stumbled but did not fall. The firelight flickered across his contorted face as he swung again, barely missing my jaw. The smoke thickened, burning my eyes. Heat scorched my skin. I had to end this quickly. "Elise, get out!" I shouted through the chaos. "Take Sophie through the window in the dining room. Go now!" "I am not leaving you, Dad," she cried. "Yes, you are. Protect her. Go!" Brent snarled and rushed forward. I grabbed a kitchen chair, stumbling backward, using it as a makeshift shield. The tool clanged loudly against the wood. I rammed the chair into his ribs with all my strength. He collapsed to one knee, gasping in pain and rage. Through the smoke, I heard Elise struggling to open the dining room window. Then Sophie's terrified cry. Then Elise's voice whispering, "It is okay, baby. Climb out. Grandpa will be right behind us." Brent threw the chair aside and lunged at me again. We crashed to the floor. His weight crushed the breath from my chest. I managed to grab his wrist as he raised the tool above me. Flames roared louder, feeding on the gasoline he had poured. Just as his arm began to descend, a booming shout echoed from outside. "Police, do not move." Lights flashed through the smoke. Boots thundered across the back porch. 2 officers burst through the opening, tackling Brent and dragging him off me. He screamed wildly, thrashing like a man possessed. One officer cuffed his wrists while another pinned his legs to the ground. As they hauled him away, he shrieked, "You cannot keep her from me. I will come back, I swear it." But his voice faded beneath the crackle of flames and the shouts of firefighters rushing into the house. Outside, rain pelted my face as I stumbled across the lawn. Elise was kneeling in the wet grass, holding Sophie tightly. When she saw me, relief overcame her, and she ran into my arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "Dad, I thought I lost you." "You will never lose me," I whispered, holding both of them close as firefighters battled the blaze behind us. The house would be damaged. The night had nearly ended in tragedy, but we had survived, and Brent was finally in handcuffs. 6 months passed before the final hearing arrived, though the memory of that night burned as vividly in my mind as the flames that nearly consumed our home. The months in between were filled with rebuilding both our house and our sense of safety. Elise attended therapy, slowly reclaiming the pieces of herself that had been stolen. Sophie thrived in school, drawing pictures of her family that always included me, her grandpa, standing beside her with a big smile. For the first time in years, laughter began echoing naturally through the rooms again. The day of the sentencing, Elise held Sophie's hand as we walked into the courthouse. I felt her trembling through my arm. She had testified bravely weeks earlier. Now the verdict would be final. When we entered the courtroom, the air felt thick with anticipation. Reporters filled the back rows, supporters lined the aisles. The community that once knew nothing about Elise now stood firmly behind her. Cassandra took her place beside us, calm and steady, her presence reassuring. Brent was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his wrists shackled. His hair was cropped short now, his eyes hollow, his face no longer carrying the smug confidence he had once worn like armor. Instead, he looked like a man crushed beneath the weight of his own obsession. His parents sat behind him, equally pale, their once proud posture replaced by fear. Judge Callahan entered, and silence fell over the room. "We are here to deliver sentencing," she began. "The defendant, Brent Lockwood, has been found guilty of attempted murder, arson, domestic abuse, coercion, fraud, and endangerment of a minor." Brent shifted, chains clinking softly. Judge Callahan continued, her voice steady and unforgiving. This was a calculated pattern of exploitation that targeted a vulnerable woman at the lowest point of her life. The defendant acted with intent, with cruelty, and with reckless disregard for human life. The attempted burning of the Rowan home could have resulted in multiple deaths, including that of a small child. A murmur of disgust rippled through the courtroom. Therefore, I sentenced the defendant to 22 years in state prison, without the possibility of early release. Elise gasped softly beside me. Sophie squeezed her hand. Brent did not shout or fight this time. He simply stared ahead, empty, as two officers led him away. Next came his parents. Mark and Irene Lockwood rose slowly as the judge addressed them. Evidence showed that they had knowingly participated in the fraudulent transfer of Elise's home and had repeatedly used her mental state to coerce and manipulate her into unpaid labor. Their lawyer argued for leniency, claiming they had not been involved in the violence. But Judge Callahan shook her head. "Exploitation is violence," she said firmly. "You robbed her of autonomy, dignity, and safety." She sentenced Mark to 8 years and Irene to 6. Their estate was ordered to pay $2.5 million in restitution. Every car, every investment, every asset was to be liquidated to compensate Elise for what she had endured. When the gavels struck for the final time, Elise sank into her seat, shaking with relief. "Dad," she whispered, "it is finally over." I put my arm around her. "Not over," I said softly, "but justice has begun." What followed in the weeks ahead felt like waking into a new world. Construction crews repaired the fire damage. Neighbors continued to bring meals. Donations came from people who had followed Elise's story. Cassandra visited often, checking in not as a lawyer now, but as a friend. One afternoon, Elise stood in the doorway of her newly restored home, watching Sophie chase butterflies in the yard. She looked peaceful, almost radiant. The weight she had carried for years seemed to lift inch by inch. "Dad," she said, turning to me, "I am going back to school. I want to study counseling. I want to help other women who feel trapped the way I did. I want to be someone who understands what fear looks like from the inside." I smiled. "That is exactly who you are meant to be." Sophie ran to me, wrapping her arms around my waist. "Grandpa, can we play in the backyard after dinner?" "Of course we can, sweetheart. We can play every day." As the sun drifted lower in the sky, and the breeze carried the scent of fresh paint and blooming flowers, I finally understood something I had not realized for years. Working overseas had given me money, but it had taken time. Time with Elise, time with Sophie, time I would never get back. And while I had chased success across oceans, danger had been growing quietly in the home I thought was safe. Family is not protected by the walls you build, but by the love you stand ready to defend. In the end, Elise did not survive because the law saved her. She survived because someone loved her enough to step into the fire when she could not escape it alone. This experience taught me the deepest truth of my life. Success means nothing if it costs you your family. A good home is not measured in its size or its price, but in the safety it gives to the people inside. And the greatest responsibility we have is simple. We must show up for the people who need us, especially when they do not know how to ask for help. As I watched Elise and Sophie together, laughing freely in the afternoon light, I knew one thing with certainty. This was home, and I would spend the rest of my life protecting it.